This here is a photograph I shot for a spec campaign I did for the North Face. And in today's video, I would like to take you back to the beginning of this story and bring you along on this project and show you the process from start to finish. Let's go. So what exactly is it that I did, you might be asking? I shot a spec campaign, or you could say spec work, for the North Face. Spec work, by the way, is just work that I did without actually having the client. This is actually pretty common. Many photographers and generally creatives will do spec work to build up their portfolio. And there is also a bit of speculation that maybe, just maybe, the brand will actually hire them for this type of work. So basically, I pretended that the North Face hired me to shoot a little campaign. This project is not in reality connected to the North Face. However, if you are an aspiring photographer, this is honestly a really cool way to build your portfolio and simply practice. Shoot the type of work that you want to be booked for, and the chances of you actually being booked for that type of work increases. So that's what I was up to at the beginning of May. What initially sparked this idea for me was a desire to shoot something with some deep, wet green tones. Despite my photography overall leaning more into film photography, I do still shoot digital too. I enjoy both, and one part of digital photography that many don't like as much but I actually do enjoy is the editing. I've always loved playing around with the look of my photographs in Lightroom, and one day on the way down from a hike, I suddenly had this urge to shoot some moody photos in the rain of the forest to capture a lot of greens, and editing the photos in a certain way that I had in mind.
And we've got rainy days coming up in, I think, tomorrow or day after tomorrow? Maybe we could just do this weekend.
And so it was time to get to work and come up with an idea. I love the outdoors. This shoot was going to be outdoors, and ideally I wanted to shoot in the rain. And that is where the idea to shoot for an outdoor clothing brand and all their waterproof hiking gear came up. I mainly had two brands in mind, Patagonia and the North Face, and I came up with a concept that would actually fit both. I don't know how in the loop you are with social media trends. Personally, I'm actually kind of bad at staying up to date. However, one trend I hadn't missed is this funny TikTok or reel of sorts about Salomon shoes. Those apparently have become trendy, but in cities, which is not the environment that those shoes were actually made for. And these short form videos, I guess, are making a little joke of sorts about giving the Salomon shoes the life that they deserve. And bouncing off of this idea, I thought this idea is perfect for both Patagonia and the North Face. Patagonia has somehow become the finance bros attire, and the North Face has become streetwear. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with that, at least in my opinion. I don't judge a good finance bro who likes to wear his Patagonia vest. I mean, go ahead, it's a cool brand, I get it. However, there is a touch of irony, I think, that we cannot deny, and so I decided to make this shoot about giving the jacket the life it deserves to live. And one more thing that I noticed that encouraged my idea was that on the website of, for example, the North Face, there is actually very little photography of the gear being used in harsh conditions. There's a tendency to present the clothing in this shiny, clean way that is not realistic, and so I thought, let me fill this gap and show the gear in more realistic, yet still flattering situations. So it was time to prepare. Here are the to-dos. I need to refine the idea and the visual concept. I need a location, I need a model, I need a jacket, and I need my photography gear. Let's get these done one by one. No, actually, the first thing I could do is a 2-in-1. I needed a model, and I found the perfect person for this job on Instagram. I found Katti, who also lives in Innsbruck, and she seems to have experience, love the outdoors, and be equipped with a North Face jacket. And so I DM'd her on Instagram, somewhat randomly, but luckily, she was on board. Next, I needed a location, and I already had something in mind. Do you remember last year I went on an adventure with a friend to find a temple in the mountains? The landscape we hiked across on that day was amazing and would work perfectly for my vision. So I noted the location as decided. Next, let's briefly have a look at the gear for this shoot. I decided to shoot this whole project with my Sony a7 III with the Tamron 28-75mm f2.8. This is my all-rounder serious combo, and it will do just fine for this shoot. I say serious because you know that I like to shoot with my little old Lumix GX80, however, that camera was sadly not going to cut it for this shoot. I needed the more reliable autofocus of the Sony, and I needed the fast shooting modes of the Sony, including the continuous autofocus for that, in order to shoot some action shots, which you'll see later. And also, this shoot was going to be wet, and while the Sony a7 III is not marketed as weather sealed, it can take quite a wet beating. The Lumix has withstood some rainy outings too, however, I just feel safer with the Sony for this job. Lastly, I also packed a flash that my friend Fabian was so kind to lend me for the day. I had some ideas that I wanted to try which required a flash, and so I was very happy to be able to borrow one. Speaking of flash photography and ideas, there's one more point on the to-do list, and that is to refine the idea and the visual concept. I wanted to gather some photographs to help me define the visual direction of this project, a mood board essentially. For that, and generally for all my conceptual planning of creative projects, I went to Milanote, which is a free online tool. It's kind of like a digital notebook or a board where I can dump my ideas, visualize concepts, plan shoots, and make mood boards. This is my go-to tool for planning creative projects, and Milanote as a brand actually partnered with me in the past already, and today they are back as the sponsor of this video, so shout out to them. Here's the Milanote board that I made for this project. So here is the concept and the idea, below are some notes for the location, and over here is a board within a board with my gear packing list. And here is my mood board where I gathered a bunch of photography which I categorized and added notes to. This kind of stuff really helps me to guide myself creatively in a project like this one. And here you can see some of the flash photos I was talking about. So once I was happy with the mood board, I sent it to Kati to show her what we're up to. This is, by the way, one of the things that I love about Milanote. It's so easy. I can share boards and collaborate. I can even sync it up to my phone in their mobile app. And making these mood boards literally just comes down to copy and pasting a photograph from Pinterest, for example. And for anything else, Milanote even has a bunch of templates in case you need a kickstart. And as said, this tool is free. There is a paid version, but you can do a lot with a free version too, and there's no time limit. So if you're working on a project, I'd highly recommend that you try out Milanote for yourself. You can sign up for a free account using the link in my description. Thank you so much to Milanote for working with me again. With all these preparations done, all that was left to do before the shoot was pack my gear. By the way, this is how I packed the flash to protect it from the rain. And also, I wanted to scout the location just in case there's an issue. For example, I wasn't sure if enough of the snow had actually melted away already. Alright, so this is why you do location scouting. It's the day before the shoot, and I just intended to check out the location and found out that the road to take me there is still closed. They only opened that road in June. And so I'm now currently at a different place trying to find a substitute location, and it's looking pretty good. I mean, look at this. It's pretty epic. So luckily I had a couple more possible locations up my sleeve, and this one will do just fine. It is the day of the shooting. I have a couple hours left before I need to head out, and I'm looking out the window and getting a little nervous because the weather is not as moody as I had envisioned it to be. Is this a experience that many people have? Was it just me? I find it really hard when I have a vision in my head and I'm quite fixated on it to then adapt when that vision is not possible anymore due to things that are not in my control, in this case the weather. If the weather really adapts, I already see myself having a really hard time on the shoot because I'm kind of bad at adjusting after fixating on a certain vision. So let's hope that the clouds stay and we get the moody shots that we're looking for. Fortunately, once we were at the location, the weather conditions looked promising. Let me introduce to you a new face to the channel. This is Kati.
Hi, I'm Kati.
And she's getting powered up with some lunch so that we can head up the mountain successfully, full of energy.
After a pre-shoot snack, we got ready. Kati was super equipped, by the way. I was planning to shoot a jacket. However, Kati came along with a whole outfit. She not only brought a North Face jacket, but also shoes and a backpack.
Reicht.
We began walking up the path I had scouted, and I just kept my eyes open for any interesting spots to shoot. It didn't take long until I found a little spot next to the dirt road which I thought could work well. I was keen to just get shooting. This didn't have to be anything good yet, just to get warmed up, you know. So what I was going for here is to have Kati immersed in the nature, just to start off with a wide shot.
Gut gepasst, so wenn du einfach runterschaust. Alles gut.
Here's the results of this first spot. I got a couple variations, and I think we're on the right track. It's not as moody and atmospheric as I hoped for just yet. I think some more fog would be nice, but for now, this is a decent start.
Ich glaube, da ist gut, da ist so Open Space. Kannst du kurz hier bleiben? Einfach so hier circa stehen.
Next, we were heading to the river. However, on the way, I actually quite liked the lighting on Kati's face when simply shooting a portrait right here, so I got a couple of those too.
Genau. Und bitte. Alright.
By the way, you can already tell, I suppose, the editing style I was going for with the deep green tones and overall moody atmosphere. This is not exactly the vision I was going for yet, but we're getting there.
Ich hab mich dann mehr auf so Farben, Komposition und Posen geguckt. Wenn du einmal da die durchschlängelst auf die Insel.
Here, I asked Kati to just walk through the river where possible, because I figured this would probably make for some cool, adventurous-looking photographs.
Passt schon, kannst da drüben bleiben?
Here are two that I think turned out pretty cool. By the way, I kept my shutter speed at 1/50th in order to get that natural motion blur like in films, so that both Kati's arm movements and especially the river's motion translate visually into the photograph. Next, I shot a couple more photographs of Kati in the river here because I thought it could simply look cool how she's surrounded by this rushing water. I think these turned out alright, but so far all of these seemed a bit like warm-ups. None of these felt like I had found the photographic gold I was digging for yet. But that's normal, I think. Some shoots start off really well and others need some more warming up. Excuse me, quick intermission from editing Teo. I don't usually do this, but maybe I should start doing this more often, and that is to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet and you are enjoying the video. I mean, if you're watching to this point, you might as well. Apparently this really helps out the video, so just a reminder, I'm trying to be a proper YouTuber, I suppose. Anyway, let's go back. With that shot, I decided this spot was done and we should move on in the hopes of finding something even cooler.
Ja, das. Aber stimmt jetzt wohl.
Here, I spotted some cool looking leafy plants on the other side, so we went there to see if there's any shots to get.
Wir probieren einfach mal was.
The patch of leafy plants turned out to be not as big as I thought, so I decided to try some close-up shots. We looked for a way for Kati to carefully stand next to them without stepping on them to not damage the plants, and then attempted to shoot some photos that focused on her shoes.
Wenn du so zwischen denen irgendwo bist, damit du nicht auf sie draufsteigst. Genau, wenn du da so wirklich parallel stehst.
Here are the two photos I ended up with. I quite like this closer one actually because the leaves are beautiful and the shoes simply become a part of the photograph instead of being the centerpiece. Hero shot type photos are important too, but I personally think a healthy mix is what makes a good set of photographs.
Right. Es ist.
Here we came to an open space where the forest ended and we instead faced a beautiful grass field.
Es ist halt noch nicht so ganz neblig, wie ich es gern hätte, aber man kann nicht alles haben. Okay, ich würde einfach mal ein paar Sachen ausprobieren.
I wasn't quite sure yet what I wanted to shoot here, but I asked Kathi to just walk around and I'd figure something out as we progress.
Okay. Warte mal. Bleib mal genau so. Ich weiß, ist das von vorhin so, du stehst so ein bisschen ratlos da, so, Alter, kommst du jetzt? Aber ich finde, das hat voll was in diesem Environment.
This is a bit of a random shot I got, but I love it actually. This is why I like this approach sometimes, to just go ahead and start shooting and figure things out on the way. Kathi just turned around at some point, which happened to look cool. I like how this is on the border of a commercially viable photo and a simple personal photograph that I could have casually taken on a hike. Then I was slowly inching closer to finding the type of shot I wanted to get, but I was still not really feeling confident.
So ein bisschen wirklich schon runterlaufen. Danke.
Here are some of the shots I was getting, and they're all right, but don't particularly stand out to me either.
Dann würde ich tatsächlich das selber nur mal probieren, aber ich komme viel näher zu dir.
Okay, passt.
Then Kathi was just waiting for me and got out her water bottle for a sip, and I saw some potential then for another one of those shots that look somewhat candid, as if we were on a hike and I was just snapping shots of my friends.
Thanks.
I think these turned out pretty cool. I like how this adds some variation to the type of actions I was photographing, not just walking or running, but also moments like these.
So, ist nochmal Probe, also ich schaue nur durch. Boah, okay, sorry, nur mal. Ich finde gerade noch nicht ganz den richtigen Winkel. Ich komme mal um einiges näher. Ich darf sagen, wir machen einfach. Alright, geht. Passt, danke.
We tried a couple more running shots and I decided to come closer because I felt like that would improve the photograph.
Danke. Danke.
This is what I ended up with, and I'm still not entirely happy, but it's alright. I like the motion a lot, and I think that coming closer was definitely a good move.
Ah, das ist perfekt für ein paar andere Sachen, die ich noch vorhabe. Genau, und ich dachte, da sitzt man sich ja normalerweise auf so einem gemütlichen Stein. Und der sah, finde ich, also ich sehe mich auf jeden Fall hier sitzen. Das ist fein.
Then, next I wanted to get a couple more shots of Kathi taking a rest, including some more direct commercial shots of the logos on the jackets and such. I stood next to her on the rock to get an angle from above which I thought could be interesting.
Jetzt geht's. Passt. Genau, das ist super. Alright.
I got a couple variations, and I think these turned out alright. I'm quite fond of the angle from above. It adds some diversity to the set that I had been gathering so far. Also, just getting some closer shots like these is also effective in adding variety.
Und, boah, die Schuhe sind ja perfekt. Warte, bleib mal genau so. Aber zu subtil soll es dann auch nicht sein. So, schau mal.
Here, I was getting some more detail shots of the shoes and the backpack. And this is another one where I tried to make it more commercial, I guess, by presenting the product more clearly with the logos peeking into the camera. However, one thing that might not be considered as commercially viable is that I didn't clean the gear at all. I don't want to show the shoes in their shiny, fresh off the shelf look. I want them to look the way they look when used in the environment they were made for.
So, und passt. Kann losgehen. Danke. Aber jetzt habe ich gerade gedacht, eigentlich sollen wir mal diese bewegten Sachen nur probieren da in der Gegend. Hier geht es eh gerade so flach rein. Genau hier würde ich das machen. Was sollen wir machen? Das ist die Frage. Ich überlege gerade eine lustige Sache. Also ich muss halt schauen dann im Bild, wie das ausschaut. Es könnte komplett chaotisch und kacke ausschauen.
So my plan here was to track Kathi with the camera with a shutter speed of 1/50th again in order to get that filmic motion blur, but in a still shot.
Okay, los geht's. Alright. Schau mal, das muss ich jetzt voll laden.
As someone who shoots a lot of film, it is in these kind of situations in which I really appreciate digital photography. As you can hear, I had the camera shooting in a high-speed mode, so I was firing away 20 to 30 shots in seconds, which gives me the luxury to choose the best moments later. This style of shooting is quite uncontrolled, so there's just a small amount of photos from all the shots that are actually usable, therefore we did quite a few rounds of this.
Also ich sehe nur grün. Aktuell noch. Geht.
Here are some of the many shots I got. These are my selected favourites and I'm so happy with the result. I really like these. I love the movement, the action, the look and the colours. Some of these are more clear, whereas others are almost abstract, but they all emit a certain feeling. A feeling of fun and being young and enjoying time spent in the mountains, even on wet days like these, which is exactly what I'm trying to convey in this campaign. So I'm very pleased with these results. And by the way, the combination of the greens of the grass with the fog in the back made for some fun times in Lightroom while editing. This is now very close to the style I was craving to shoot. If you like the style and would like to have this as a preset, or actually watch me break down the edits in a tutorial, you can check out my Patreon, by the way, shameless plug. Patreon is where I'm uploading just that, an editing tutorial for this shoot and a preset in this style. There's a link in the description in case this is something of interest to you. After that, we hiked a little further up and the clouds came rolling in, giving us some thick fog to shoot in. Here's the result of what I just shot. I attempted to find balance in the composition by positioning Cutty on the left and the trees on the right. With the atmospheric fog, I think this one looks pretty cool.
Kannst du ein kleines bisschen dich doch hier rüber drehen? Ja, da ist gut, da ist gut. Danke.
And here are two vertical shots that I took with a lot of negative space in case I want to add some typography in the open areas later.
Ah, Nebel.
Next I spotted a rock and thought it'd be good to get some shots there too, to use the variety in terrain that we could get. However, I couldn't find much interesting stuff to shoot, but I tried a couple things.
Ich weiß jetzt nicht, wie stabil der ist. Ja, ein bisschen schräger. Und ich glaube, das ist ganz cool. Danke.
Here's what I ended up with. These aren't bad, but they also aren't particularly interesting, I find. But it's good to have them, and maybe they'll come in handy later. Then, just as I was about to head back out of this spot with the rock, I thought that this might actually be a neat spot to try a couple more shoe photos.
Oh, warte. Ich würde die Schuhe noch mitnehmen. Bleib einfach so stehen.
This is me experimenting with some movement again as I try to capture a dynamic moving shot of the shoe. Here's what I got, and I have to say, I really like the moving shots. I think of the shoe photo attempts so far, these are the best.
Deckstein.
After that, I was meaning to move on to the flash photography that I wanted to do. However, I felt like I just wanted to make a little more use of the fog here, just in case, so I shot a couple more closer photos of Cutty, many with some movement again.
Fast.
These didn't turn out particularly interesting, I think, but again, could turn out to be useful later when compiling a set. Next, it was time to begin our descent back to the forest. There was mainly one more thing that I wanted to try, which was the ideas I had in mind with the flash. And for this, I was thinking of returning to the forest, which we did, and once we found a decent spot to shoot, I realised that I need to shoot a couple more photos of Cutty in the forest here, because this is like a much more atmospheric version of the photos I got at the beginning of the shoot. I think these are epic. Fog never disappoints me, but this combination of fog, forest, the river, the rain was just a whole nother level of beautiful. I'm very happy with these results. Then it was finally time to get out the flash. I had a specific technique in mind that I wanted to try out in these conditions. Basically, what I was doing is this. I set the shutter speed quite low, so in this case to 1 second. Accordingly, I set the other settings in a way that would balance the exposure out. So in this case, my ISO was at 50 and my aperture was set to f9 or f8, something in that area. And then I held the camera in one hand and the flash in the other with my thumb on the trigger of the flash to manually set off the light. With some movement and some repetition, I was able to get this shot.
Oh, ich liebe den Effekt, der ist schon cool.
So happy with this outcome. This is exactly what I was going for. This mix of flash, which gives a sharp, bright foreground with a darker background that has a bunch of motion blur, looks so cool in my opinion, and this is something I knew how to do, but never really tried because I didn't have a flash. We then tried a couple more poses and angles in this style to have a couple of these to mix into the set. So in case you don't quite understand the way this technique works yet, here's a rough explanation. The camera is set to shoot a balanced or slightly dark exposure, but with a 1 second long exposure, which of course results in a shaky, blurry photo. However, if I press the flash at some point within that 1 second time frame that the camera is recording, the exposure will also capture that split-second moment in which the flash exposes the foreground. Because that flash is bright and so quick, the foreground will appear sharp, whereas the background will appear shaky and blurry. Here's one that worked out quite nicely, I find. I love this mix of sharpness and intense motion blur. Additionally, the rain is adding these water droplets everywhere, which adds even more character, I find. Here's an example of one that is almost a bit too shaky and not quite as clear. Maybe the flash also wasn't close enough, I'm not entirely sure, but in this version, Katti's almost melting into the background. Here is one of my favorites. This is a closer photo of Katti from a slightly lower angle. Everything around her is going wild in this version, whereas her face is completely sharp, and the composition here feels quite balanced, so I'm really fond of it. At this point, I was satisfied with the portraits I had taken, however I decided I ought to try this technique for the shoes and the backpack too.
So jetzt aber.
Here's the result of the shoes, and I love it. The composition is in a way really basic, but I think the lighting and the motion blur compensate that and make this photograph quite interesting.
Ich nehme noch den Rucksack mit. Magst du vielleicht nur mal so den Fluss anschauen und ich fotografiere von hinten den Rucksack?
Then I tried the same for the backpack, and this was looking quite promising because the angle allowed me to get a bright shot of the logo, which for commercial purposes can be useful, I guess.
Oh, ich weiß nicht, der Look ist schon cool.
Here it is. I'm again very satisfied with the result, really like the look of this. At last, I wanted to try one more idea with this technique. I asked Katti to walk towards me as I got the shot.
Geht? Schau kurz. Passt.
These turned out pretty cool as well, although I prefer the angle from below because the background made for some more interesting textures in those. And here's a happy accident. I mistakenly didn't flash this one, however in post I then thought that this abstract shot actually looks pretty cool, so I kept it. And with that, the shoot was done. I was very happy with the shots I had, so I decided that this was enough, and the last step was the post-production. Of course, post-production involved lots of selecting and finding the best photos of the many that I took on that day, and then I just edited all of them with a somewhat coherent look. Some are a bit darker or brighter, but overall there is a consistent mood, I'd say, even with the flash photography that stands out stylistically. I tried to preserve the skin tones while getting the greens to look very green, almost with a touch of blue, to create a strong contrast between the greens and the oranges. At last, I made some posters, or whatever you want to call these. Mind you, I am not a designer. In fact, my professors in uni made it quite clear that I'm really bad at design, so maybe don't be too critical of these creations here. I just made these to show you what else can be made with this set of photographs apart from just using them as standalone photos. Finally, I put together a little PDF presentation of sorts with the final selection and all that, which is what I would send to the client to present the results if this were a real job. I hope this was interesting, insightful, or simply entertaining for you. Thank you so much to Kati for making this project possible, and that's it. Before saying goodbye, I would like to say a massive thank you to the lovely people supporting me and my work on Patreon. Thank you so much to each one of you. If you are interested in the Lightroom presets and tutorials that I talked about, you can check out my page via the link in the description. Also, I have a print shop, by the way, in case that is of interest to you. Also, link in the description. With that said, I hope to see you again soon. Until then, goodbye.